can you talk about concealed ovulation in humans and what it says about our species writ large? Thanks. You are both national treasures. I'll let you handle that. I'll be right back.
All right. Fair enough. So concealed ovulation is the pattern of having fertility obscure. And the thing is, concealed ovulation is concealed from women. They do not know when they are fertile. Now, that assertion always gets pushback because in modern times it is perfectly possible to know when you are fertile as a human female. And many women may have some intuition about this, but the intuition is not precise enough to act upon. So the question is, why would selection have done this? It seems like knowing when you're fertile would be a very powerful piece of information in the hands of women. And I don't know what you will say about why selection has obscured ovulation from women, but I have the sense that it is a lineage level.
Evolution has obscured what I will say about the obscuring of ovulation from you.
Interesting. Wow, that I did not see that coming. Yeah. All right. The question is, are women better off not knowing? My guess is yes. And are the lineages to which women belong better off without women knowing? Which I think the answer is almost certainly yes. So to the extent.
So I will just say there's always the issue also of who is it concealed from, right? Ovulation appears to be fully concealed, or at least concealable to the outside.
Yeah.
Unless you start having things like menstrual leave, like we talked about yesterday. God.
Revealed ovulation.
Yes. But, whenever I used to talk about this in classes, I'd always have a couple.
Yeah, I've already said this. You always get pushback on the assertion that women don't know.
And I think that certainly there are ways that you can't, even if you don't actually have a way to physiologically tell.
Yeah.
And I never had the sense. I don't have the sense that I can, right? But some people claim they can. You can, if you can count. And if you are somewhat regular, you can come to know.
No, it's a question of precision. And the answer is, can you have a sense about roughly when in the calendar or in your cycle you are? Yes, that's possible.
But many women are highly regular.
Sure, but the question of how precise at the level of hours to days is the level of precision is not high enough. What's more,
no, but it is for many people. It is.
Maybe, but you have to take all of this back to an ancestral circumstance in which there was no ability to figure out what the exact...
And being able to count versus keeping track is a different question. And so certainly, pre-writing, keeping track might have been an almost impossibility.
But imagine, in an ancestral circumstance where women's period, let's say that women are perfectly regular in some sense, but they are not the same regular. In other words, one woman might be, 3 days ahead of her cycle, her period. Another woman might be 5, each of them being perfectly regular. But the point is, there's no way for the information to be passed one generation to the next about you are fertile at this point. It is something you can deduce with scientific tools, but in the absence of those tools, you wouldn't know.
Well, I guess I don't understand what you just did there, because my sense is that this is one of these laboratory of the self things. It's not about presumably there's some information that passes from mother to daughter in a pre-literate society. I suppose we're now supposed to call them non-literate, because the idea is that they're not necessarily becoming literate. But it's really more about at what you have variation in what you're experiencing, and if you've gotten pregnant even once, and you were keeping track of what you were experiencing, and when you expected to start bleeding, and the fact that you didn't, you can basically do laboratory of the self on yourself.
No, I don't think even remotely, because then what we're saying is women who have been pregnant once might have information if their sexual behavior, if the regularity of their cycle is sufficient, and if their sexual behavior was limited such that they knew exactly which act of sex had produced the offspring, then they could begin to deduce that. But a woman who did know exactly what act of sex had produced the offspring but wasn't perfectly regular couldn't.
Yeah, no, and it requires a low degree of promiscuity, a low degree of sexual behavior.
Right.
Yeah,
It requires a lot
yeah.
of things. So the basic answer is this is so noisy that you wouldn't dare use this information to try to regulate your own reproduction because you're going to screw it up. So anyway, I mean, we can battle this out, but I think the answer is yes.
But I mean,
modern
the
people can figure it out.
And the flip side is using the so-called rhythm method to not get pregnant. And so it's true. It's it's a span of days. I think I've never looked into it much, but it's a span of 3, 4, 5 days.
Right.
So that's pretty broad. And you get peak fertility for only 24, 48 hours or so of that. But maybe your argument is that basically requires at least an ability to keep track, to keep notes. But I think you're also arguing that it requires a deeper understanding, scientifically derived, of the fertile period.
Yeah, I think it requires a large population to be studied so that we know how long fertile periods tend to be, how much variation there tends to be, so that you can, and I think it is implausible, and that the default is that we should just simply assume that there was an awful lot of knowledge about the basics of how reproduction worked, and that does not amount to the kind of precision that gives women anything like insight enough to act on it. So it is concealed from women as much as it is from men, or almost as much. So question is why? Mm-hmm. And my point would be two of them. One, that the weird thing about humans in this neighborhood is that humans are almost unique in having sex for pleasure. What is that about? That is about relationship building. So the point is that in some sense, selection has rigged us so that we will partner up, right? Mm-hmm. Sex is a reward for partnering up. And not knowing when you're fertile means it's much harder to game that system. It is much harder for men to participate in sex only when it will produce offspring. And so it tends to produce relationships with investing parents. That's one thing. The other thing...
Doesn't that explanation only justify concealing the ovulation from men, though?
No. And that's part of the second reason, is that I think if women knew, men would overpower them to find out. And so that's what
menstrual huts is, right?
Well, I think menstrual huts are multiple things. Mm-hmm. One of them actually empowers women to actually game a system in a way that is good for lineage and good for offspring, and not necessarily good for men. So much as, well, let's say that a woman, either a woman has been raped, or she has produced an offspring without a commitment from a man. Mm-hmm. And let's suppose that the wise females decide that this baby is going to be born and it's not going to have a father, and that's bad. So what they decide to do is portray this woman as still having periods, which they have everything necessary to do that. Yeah, I guess it
depends on how it is that it is decided that it's time for you to go to the menstrual hut. If it's entirely self-selection, like, right. I'm going now,
right?
Then this is a way for women to control the narrative around what is true about their own reproduction,
right? Mm-hmm. Which then presumably results in some children having male parental effort who wouldn't otherwise.
The idea being, no, but I just was in the menstrual hut last month, and the only person I had sex with since then is you, and therefore you must be the father.
Right. Now, the really interesting question, the deep and almost too taboo to deal with in public question, is what the hell is going on with menstruation in the first place? Which you would tend to think this is a mammal issue. It is not. Yeah. This is a human issue. Visible menstruation.
It shows up in a few other mammals.
There are other things that are kind of related, like the heat that fertile dogs experience, which involves blood, which is visible.
Yeah, and I suspect, there may be something very interesting going on right, that is actually about social evolution and such. But I suspect that at least a big part, if not all of the part of the explanation for what the hell is going on with menstruation anyway, has to do with the fact that in modernity, and I mean, you know this already, but in modernity, weird women, Western educated, industrialized, rich, democratic country living women tend to start menses at like 13 and 50-ish. And, maybe if they have 2 kids and they breastfeed for a while, miss 5-6 years in there, right? But they're basically having 13 cycles a year for decades. Whereas in hunter-gatherer societies where it's been looked at, and there's no reason I've ever seen to expect that those were unusual, on average, a woman who is past her reproductive capability, who's in menopause, will have had fewer than 10 menstruations in her entire life. And that is due to a combination of, to some degree, undernourishment, although really that's not the main thing. It's that mostly it's about, yes, more babies, but not a particularly high or short interbirth interval. Rather, that much longer reliance on breastfeeding. And when you breastfeed on demand and the kid is eating, is breastfeeding, it's something like with closer than every 6 to 8 hours, that produces a kind of lactational amenorrhea. That is, it blocks ovulation. And so you end up with an interbirth interval that's quite long in hunter-gatherers, like 4, 5, 6 years, with maybe 1 or 2 menstruations between the finishing of the breastfeeding of the previous kid before a woman gets pregnant again. So, part of what we're seeing is just so much menstruation in modern times that never would have happened before.
I, of course, don't disagree with that. That's all true.
Yeah.
You still have the system, which is then wildly distorted by modernity.
But
my
point is, I think that chimps also have it. I think I'm not positive about this.
We should look. I don't think they do. But my point is, you have concealed ovulation, and you have revealed. What would the term even be?
I don't know yet.
A woman who is menstruating, who is actively menstruating, is revealing that she has the resources to produce a child.
Revealed fertility potential.
She is not pregnant, right? She has the resources. She's not in amenorrhea from lack of calories. She's not in amenorrhea because the body will prevent a pregnancy in order to keep a newborn from competing with a non-weaned child. So my point is, you've got a signal of one thing and an obscuring of a signal of another thing, and this is really unusual. Both things are unusual. Sure. And
they seem to run a bit counter to one another.
I think they actually run in the same direction, but the basic point is biology is rigging our physiology and our information to predispose us to investing in offspring as pairs. And the reason that you would do that is the huge frickin' expense of raising a human offspring. And why is it so expensive? Because humans are so freaking complicated that childhood goes on forever. And so anyway, the point is, wow, is this a unique species? And the sexuality, is as weird as any creature.
Yeah. Sorry, you said pairs and I imagined a baby with a pear shape.
No.
That's not what
That's
you meant.
not good. No, not at all.
With like a stem on top. Hey guys, that was a clip from our monthly private Q&A that you can get access to at my Heather Hying's Patreon. And you can also get access there to all of the past paid subscriber content. So please consider joining us there.
Did you mention that these private Q&As are the key to living a better life and living to tell the tale?
I forgot to do that. These private Q&As are in fact the key to living a better life and what?
Living to tell the tale.
Living to tell the tale. Go ahead, live to tell the tale. Join us there.
See ya.